Okay, welcome to our webinar. This is Making the Most of the Space That You Have, and my name is Caroline Smith. I'm one of the consultants at the South Carolina State Library, and I have a couple of announcements before I introduce our speaker. As many of our projects are funded, this is made possible in part by a Library Services and Technology Act grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which is administered by us, the South Carolina State Library. And this webinar will be recorded. You'll receive a link to the recording and the slides by email within a few days. And feel free to ask questions during the webinar. You can use the chat. And I'll be monitoring that. And you are also welcome to turn on the closed captioning in Zoom. If you look towards the bottom of your screen, there should be a button to turn that on. With that, I will introduce our speaker. Lauren Stara is a registered architect and librarian specializing in library building design. Her past library experience includes everything from front desk clerk to director in 3 small public libraries in Colorado, Washington, and British Columbia, and as an instructor in library design for 4 universities. She's worked as a library building consultant for the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners for over 10 years, and now she presents, speaks, and consults for libraries across North America. We're very honored to have you here with us today, Lauren. I will turn it over to you. And you are muted.
Good. Thank you so much, Caroline. How long have we been doing Zoom? I think I should know to unmute before I start talking by now. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here to talk to you all. And I do want to say before I start sharing my slides that I am available to any of you to ask specific questions if you don't want to, if you come up with questions later that you'd like to ask. I'm going to give you my email address at the end of this. Feel free to contact me with your specific questions. Okay, so I am going to share my screen now. Okay. Are you seeing my slides? Great. Okay, so Carolyn told you about my background a little bit. I do want to say that I was a practicing architect before I became a librarian. I had a very early midlife crisis at about the age of 30, and I became a ski bum, moved to Colorado, and I got a um, summer job because I worked for the ski area, but you can't work for the ski area in the summer. And I got a summer job at the local public library. And, you know, it just went from there. Within 2 years, I was full time. And 2 years after that, I started my master's degree. And there you go. And then about 12 years ago, I realized that there was an opportunity to combine both of my passions into one. And I feel like I have the best job in the world. All right. So one thing I know about libraries, having worked in them for many years, is that there's never enough space. You never have enough space. But before you can really think about creating more space, you need to find out what you have. You need to understand what you have. And I think it's helpful to understand the kinds of space you have, because not all space is equal. It's not just one big blob of space. So for public libraries, there are public space and there's staff space. Those are pretty obvious. But there's also what I call in-between space. Like, for example, service desks. Are they public? Are they staff? They're kind of both or neither. If you have a meeting room with a kitchenette, that kitchen is kind of public space, kind of staff space, and storage is another kind of space altogether. And I know that none of us have enough storage ever. And then another sort of type of space from the architectural point of view is called unprogrammed space. And that is the kinds of spaces like stairs and hallways, mechanical rooms, restrooms, the kinds of places in your building that those areas are in every building, not just specific to libraries. And believe it or not, those unprogrammed spaces take up about 30% of your square footage. We all know, I don't have to tell you that library services are changing very quickly, and the services we provided 30, 20, 10, even 5 years ago are not what we're doing now. I'm sure everyone here has a service or program that you'd like to provide, but you're unable to find the right kind of space to do it in. So now I'm going to tackle a pretty big subject, which is clutter. And this is one of my mantras: stuff expands to fill space, right? Just like time, work expands to fill time, stuff expands to fill space. These are some photos from a library, a very small town library. The town is less than 600 people. It's located in an old school building shared with town offices, and it's only open 12 hours a week. The librarian has no money and no support from the town. But what she does have is a habit of rescuing stuff from the transfer station and bringing it back to the library. This is a room of just over 1,000 square feet. And there is stuff everywhere. There are 6 sofas in this room. There's so much stuff, both physical clutter and visual clutter. The eye has nowhere to rest in the entire room. Now, this is an extreme example, and I am not saying that this librarian is wrong or bad. My point is that we, as librarians in general, we're collectors. That's part of our job. We collect. We like to collect and organize stuff. And we don't like to get rid of stuff that might be useful someday. And I want to emphasize this: it might be useful someday. So I want you to embrace your inner toddler and say no. Librarians tend to do more with less. We tend to present a good face to the public and to minimize problems. We have to learn that we can't be all things to all people, and we have to prioritize, and we have to say no. And we have to say no to the nice old lady that wants to donate her beloved collection of stuff to the library. We have to say no to the outraged patron who demands that we never weed old, out of date, or unused items from the collection because a book is a precious object. No to the children's librarian who keeps 20-year-old decorations, toys, and craft supplies because she might be able to use them someday. We simply don't have the luxury of space to keep things that we don't need. So my first tip is to do a ruthless clear out of stuff. If you haven't used it in 3 to 5 years, get rid of it. If you have chairs that are uncomfortable or worn, or if you have a stash of broken furniture or outdated computer equipment, a technology graveyard, get rid of it. If you, like this library in the upper left-hand corner, have a collection of old birds stuffed with arsenic, get rid of them. If you have collections of stuff that were donated at some point in the midst of time, at least find out what the conditions of the donation were and whether you are able to get rid of them. unless they meet your mission. I mean, I'm not telling you that your mission can't be to have these things, but if your mission is as a public library to provide information services to your patrons, things like this belong in a historical society or a local museum, not in the public library. Okay. One caveat is that if you don't know already, check with your governing entity. I believe most of you are county library systems, so check with your county to find out what the rules are around disposal of public property, because you may have to. I remember when I was in the state of Washington, we had to have a public auction. We couldn't just get rid of stuff. So if they have rules and regulations about that, unless it's truly broken and worthless, you can't just put it in the dumpster. Okay, library collections. This is a very big and difficult topic in public libraries. How big should your collection be? And I will say that I think a lot about this, and I truly believe that every library should have a collection development policy. And in that policy, it should talk about what you collect, what you don't collect, and how long you keep things. What is your service philosophy? How big should your collection be, and what should it contain? A current curated print collection circulates way better than a larger, tired-looking one. Do you have encyclopedias and reference books that are never used? How many years of magazine back files should you keep? And I don't know the answer to this. I didn't ask Caroline about this. What cooperative borrowing systems do you have? If you really go hyper local and tailor your collection to your individual patrons, you can really right size your shelving needs. So if you don't have a collection development policy that spells out your priorities, consider writing and adopting one. Policies are a great way to broadcast your message and your vision. Obviously, you have to work with your trustees and have the board approve it, and it needs to be reviewed regularly. A policy shouldn't be a dead document. It should be a living tool that you work with every day. Okay, on to space. How do you find more space? I know that most of you, the first way is to increase the library's footprint. And my guess is that if you're here, you're probably not in the middle of a major renovation project where you're going to either build a new building or add on space. So, you know, if you do, that's great, but most libraries aren't in that position. The second way is to repurpose space, and that is, as I said a minute ago, get rid of unnecessary stuff, change the function of underused spaces, reorganize, reduce collection size and shelving space, and converting existing spaces to multi-use space. So that's making existing space more flexible. As I said, most libraries aren't in the position of constructing an addition or a new library building. So I'm going to talk about the other two kinds. So repurposing space. Do you have a massive bank of vertical file cabinets? How much of that stuff is used? Can these things be converted to digital and be made available online? What other space hogs do you have that are little used? I think one of my fundamental points is that you need to think about what your priorities are in your library building and not doing things just because that's the way you've already done them. So if your priority is to provide more people space, then you have to get rid of some of your collections. That's just the law. It's a law of physics. You know, you can't do more stuff with the same space you have. So these are this is a couple of examples of some repurposed space. So on the right two photos are of a closet. Yes, it was a closet and it was converted into a children's room. So this is a very tiny library and they didn't have space for their a special place for children's services. So they took this closet and installed some shelves. They got some local artist to do this amazing Dr. Seuss mural. And I'm not 100% sure. I think the window was already there, although why a window would be in a closet, I have no idea. So it's a tiny little space, but it's a children's space for specifically for children. The photo on the left is also in a children's room. It's a tiny computer workstation that was inserted into an unused corner. Very little space was needed, and they needed a computer, so they carved out this little space for that computer. One thing I recommend in understanding, as I said earlier, it's important to understand what you have. It's also important to understand how what you have is used. So I recommend doing a 2-week sweep study of your library. And that is where you have a big form, and I have an example of a form that I will share with anyone. Every hour, have someone walk around the library and record which pieces of furniture are being used, what equipment is being used. And I guarantee that you'll find some places that aren't used ever. Making your space work harder. So one of the things that I talk about a lot is flexibility in space. And one of the ways that you can increase the flexibility of the space is to use mobile shelving and furniture. So this is the upper photo is of traditional steel shelving, and the lower photo is of shelving that is mobile. So these are units that you can move out of the way when you want to use the space for something else. Okay, this is about service desks. What is your service desk like? The upper left photo it's one of my favorite photos because it is so illustrative of what service desks used to be. They used to be specifically and intentionally to serve as a barrier between staff and patrons. And newer library philosophies are that staff are to come out onto the floor and help patrons where they are, meet patrons where they are. So these kinds of desks take up a lot of space, and they also serve as a physical and psychological barrier. So service desks are trending to much smaller and less monumental, and it makes it a lot easier for both staff and patrons to come together. When I was a librarian when I started in the library in the early 90s, I quickly found out that when I was standing behind the desk, people felt hesitant to come up to the desk and ask a question because they thought I was busy back there. And I have come to find out that a smaller, less imposing desk is a lot more welcoming for people. Do you have multiple desks? Most public libraries have greatly reduced their reference collections, and a separate reference desk isn't necessarily needed. You might consolidate into a single service point, and that would free up some space for another function. Another thing I want to point out in this upper right hand desk, and this is true for the lower right-hand desk as well. These are desks with adjustable height surfaces. So that is helpful not only for accessibility and ADA compliance, but it's also helpful for ergonomics. So I think a lot about library staff who are sitting at a desk all day or standing behind a desk all day. And if somebody is very tall or very short, the standard height of the counter does not serve them well. So having a desk that has variable height is good for the health and wellness of your staff, as well as for welcoming patrons of all types. Multi-use space. Do you have a separate local history room that is underused? I would say that's a prime candidate for evaluation of what is in that collection and to retain only what is truly unique, valuable, or specifically pertinent to your area. Your state agency, again, I didn't ask Caroline about this, but they may have someone on staff who's an expert in preservation, and they can help you with evaluating that collection. If you have artifacts, which are objects, not print materials, can you relocate them to a local history museum? Again, what were the terms of the acquisition or the donation? Can the valuable items be kept in a locked cabinet with either glass or a grill that circulates air, and then the room opened up for quiet study, collaborations, or meetings for outside organizations? Choose equipment and furnishings when you're buying new things. Choose them for flexibility, portability, and storability in mind. And also, not on this slide, durability also. So here are some examples. The upper right-hand slide is of those same mobile shelving units. The lower right, this is of a study table that comes with its own little wall. And this brings up two issues in libraries today. One is acoustics. Noise is a terrible problem in most libraries today, and I'm going to address that in a minute. But this is a off-the-shelf item that you can buy, and this little wall has acoustic properties, so it deadens the sound a little bit for this person. It also helps people feel comfortable. So I want you to imagine this table without that wall. It's just a table out there in the middle of space. And the upper right-hand photograph illustrates this as well. Imagine that upper right-hand photograph, all those little tables without those vertical whiteboards next to them. That for me would not be a comfortable place to sit because it's out in the open. And that is there's a technical term for that. It is thigmotaxis. And that is the human desire to be next to a wall or to have shelter. Early man didn't want to be out there in the middle of the savannah where predators could get them. They wanted to be next to a cliff or under shelter of some kind. And for people to feel comfortable, just having that little vertical plane there makes all the difference. It's really psychologically very interesting. You'll notice that all of these things are also on wheels, so you can move them around if you find that the need for where those things are varies from hour to hour or day to day or week to week or season to season. You can move them around quite easily. The same with the lower left-hand corner. This is, I don't know how many times I have injured my back moving heavy tables around the library. And these tables, they are flip-top tables. They are on wheels. They nest like this so that you can stack them together and store them if you need to, or you can pull them apart and set them up quite easily. And again, ergonomics for your staff. You want to be looking out for their health and wellness. Adding mobility to furniture makes it possible to clear out a space previously locked into shelving or seating and use it for program space. And I am going to show you this. So this is 2 photographs of the library in Whistler, British Columbia, where I was library director from 2006 to 2012. We opened this new building in 2008, and it was too small the day it opened, and we knew it was going to be too small. That was the building that we were able to build. But the thing that saved us was this building was an L-shaped building. It is an L-shaped building, and in the lower right photograph, the wing off to your right has standard steel shelves in it, but the wing in front of you has all mobile shelving. And if you're going to purchase mobile shelving, I highly recommend seeing and testing the unit yourself in person, or some other staff. These units are so stable, so durable, and so easy to move that a single person, I can move them. The meeting room in this library only has a capacity of 62, but when we move these units out of there, we can have events for 300. We had a cocktail reception, we had a First Nations dance performance in there, and we have had several concerts in this space. It's very easy to move. They can move all of those units out in about 15 minutes. When you're choosing mobile furniture, size does matter. And I highly recommend investing in quality casters. At 5-inch locking hard rubber casters are the best. If you get little plastic casters, they're going to break. They just will. Although on chairs, it depends on the use. But for shelving, I really think that really good casters are important. As I said, never purchase something unless you've seen it and pushed it around fully loaded, or at the very least spoken to somebody else who has. Don't skimp and get the cheap ones, because you won't be happy with them. It is even possible to make existing furniture and shelving mobile. So the lower left-hand corner is some old wooden shelves. This is from a very historic library in Massachusetts. And they had a furniture maker in town add casters to the bottom of these shelves. And now these shelves, I am not convinced that it's a good idea to put wheels on shelves this tall. In general, I say 60 inches high is the limit, because they become unstable if they're too tall. But these seem to work for them. They don't move them that often, but when they do, they have at least 2 people on each unit to move it. The other 2 photos on this slide are one of my favorite applications of this. These are very heavy wooden library tables, big library tables, and the lower left slide shows that they found these foot-operated casters. You screw them in, and then let me say this right. The wheel on the right is in the upright position. So it's the leg of the chair is moved, is resting on the ground. And then the wheel closer to the photographer is, excuse me, being pushed down by the foot pedal. And those lock in place. They raise the table up a little bit and you can move it off to the side. Technology is getting smaller. Consider replacing desktop computer workstations with mobile devices like laptops or tablets that patrons can use wherever they want inside the library. Obviously, this requires robust Wi-Fi and a way to charge and store devices, but it's a lot more flexible. And we all know that dedicated desktop workstations take up a lot of space. Now, I'm not advising you to get rid of all the fixed workstations. You need at least one or two. Some people prefer that, and it is necessary to have at least one for ADA accessibility. The photograph in the middle is a rack. This actually is in South Carolina, your neighbor. And it's a rack that's mounted on the wall in the storage room. You can see the courier bins underneath, and that's where they store the laptops. The photograph in the upper left, that's in Ohio, and that is a laptop vending machine. People can use their library card to borrow a laptop or a tablet for a certain length of time. And the two photos on the right are of library catalog computers. And instead of devoting an entire workstation to that, they have tablets that are mounted, touchscreen tablets that are mounted on either on the wall or on the side of a shelf. And that saves a lot of space. It not only saves space, but it puts the catalog computer where people need it in the stacks, not somewhere else. For public areas, always think about ways for spaces to serve more than one purpose. If you have a room dedicated to a single purpose, like a computer lab or a makerspace, if you there are ways to increase the flexibility. So as I said, flip top tables instead of fixed tables, use laptops instead of desktops, put 3D printers or other computer or other equipment on carts that you can roll out or in. The photograph on the left is of whiteboards that people can wheel in and out for when they need those things. What types of seating do you have? It's really important to provide a variety of seating types. Table seating, library, the standard library table seating is important. It's a good idea. But soft seating with individual side tables is a lot more comfortable for many people. People like to be comfortable and feel like they're at home when they come to the library. And so things to think about with that is access to power, a policy that allows covered beverages in the library, things like that. And the other thing about seating is I highly recommend, like with mobile shelving, I highly recommend that you not purchase a chair that you haven't sat in and that you haven't had other people of different heights and widths sit in. Different chairs are comfortable for different people, and you want to choose things that fit as many people as possible or have a wide variety. And the other thing about furniture, this isn't specifically to do with existing space and making it more usable, but it's really important, like with the shelving that I mentioned earlier, with furniture, to not skimp on quality, because commercial furniture is very expensive. I understand. But if you'd say, oh, I can go to IKEA or the local furniture store and buy residential furniture, it simply will not stand up to the beating that furniture takes in a public library. It will last maybe a year, maybe not even. If you have large library tables, or like lots of 4-person tables or even 6-person tables like the ones in the upper left, I'm sure that you have seen the behavior of people, which is that one person will sit at a table and nobody else will sit there. It's better to have either 2-person tables that you can push together to make a 4-person or 6-person table if you need a group situation, or pull them apart and one person can sit at each 2-person table. And then the other 3 pictures are of tables that are, the one on the upper right is a 4-person table, but they have installed these plexiglass dividers. And it is far more likely that 4 people would sit at that table because there is a sense of privacy and a sense of comfort. And they also have a little task light there, which is nice. The lower 2 pictures are of a table. It's a standard round table that was retrofitted with these acrylic dividers. And so they were bought, this was bought at WB Mason. I'm not sure if they have a presence in South Carolina, but I'm sure there's a place near you that can do this for you. And this is just an example of, I'm sure that you have seen many of these things, the amazing kinds of things that you can do in children's rooms. The upper left-hand photo is one of my favorites because this is a library that didn't have the space for a Lego table. So they put a Lego table on their wall. And likewise, the upper right-hand photo is of a magnetic panel that was installed on a wall that kids can play with magnets on. I mean, you can find ways to provide fun and interesting things without taking up a lot of space. And this is a few examples of some teen spaces, and I want to call your attention particularly to the upper left and the lower right. These are, upper left it was a window between the teen room and another space in the library. And they decided to allow the kids to draw on those windows with the special glass markers. So it gave the teens a way to personalize the space, to feel like they belonged there. They could claim that space, but they didn't have to take up any extra space. And then the one on the lower left is a similar situation, but those are tables that are made of whiteboard material. And so the kids can draw on it, use it for homework, or just have fun with it. I spoke a moment ago about the need for power. This has become a really, really important thing in libraries, because especially existing libraries or historic libraries that don't have a lot of power outlets. And these are some ways to provide power where you probably couldn't before. The upper left these are charging bricks that you can buy, and you can have the library's logo imprinted on them. And they are little chargers that people can borrow and use and then return. The lower left is not the most graceful solution, but it is functional. And that is just a big power strip mounted on the library table. And people love it. People use it. The power then goes down the leg of the table into a floor outlet. And the the two photographs on the right are in a very old library, a very old historic library where there are these old-fashioned built-in carrels. And they just added these little units that have both outlets and also USB plugs. So they were able to provide power where there was none before. Lighting. Lighting is very essential for libraries because we still have the print page as our primary brand. So providing task lighting rather than just having the wash of fluorescent or hopefully LEDs, you know, the uniform illumination level. These are ways that you provide illumination at the surface, at the work surface, and that's actually better than uniform lighting for the human eye, is to illuminate the surface that you're working on. So these are some examples of table lamps, and these table lamps also have outlets to provide power for patrons. And then on the right, this is some shelving that was in a dark corner. People couldn't read the spines. And so they installed little strips of LED lighting right there on the shelves themselves. I said a minute ago that I was going to talk about acoustics because noise is such a problem. I like to say that, and I'm going to speed up so we have a little time for questions. I like to say that we used to, in the old days, we used to have to find a special place to make noise in the library, and now we have to find a special place to find quiet in the library. And there are ways to mitigate acoustics. None of them are perfect, but in general, any soft surface like felt or carpet or acoustic tile will dampen the sound. And it's becoming more of a problem now because in the aftermath of COVID, people are moving away from fabric and they're going to more hard surfaces because of the cleanability, and that's certainly understandable. But if that happens, you need to work harder with acoustic panels, maybe some panels on the wall or on the ceiling, or there are some other ways to work on that. Self-service. I think self-service is really important because it's something that people expect now. Who ever thought that we would have self-checkout in the supermarket, but now they're everywhere. So these are some examples. The upper left is of a self-checkout machine. Many libraries have these now, but not all. I recently moved from Massachusetts to California. And to my surprise, the libraries near me don't have self-checkout, and I don't really understand it. But that's how it is there. The photo on the right is of lockers. These are also in Ohio, and these hold pickup lockers can be as low tech or as high tech as you want. I have seen them in a very small library. It was an old antique milk pickup station that they had put locks on, and they have combination locks that you can change the code every time. All the way up to this kind of thing where it's actually hooked into your ILS and it checks the book out when they remove the item from the locker. The nice thing about this is that it not only provides services outside of regular hours. So there are people that can't come to the library when it's open. That's just a fact of life. So being able to pick up things outside of library hours is a very important service for a small number of patrons. But it also, as we learned during COVID, it offers contactless services, and we have to face it that COVID may not be the last pandemic. There's probably another one coming, and so we have to plan for that going forward. The photo on the left is literally of a vending machine that is in a commuter rail station. So it says on the front, we're bigger than our buildings, and you can use your library card to borrow DVDs or books or whatever, and also to return at a remote location. And that's very, very convenient also. Displays, and I'm gonna go faster. Displays, we all know that the bookstore model and face out shelving creates higher circulation for those things. And you can carve out places for displays almost anywhere. Under a stairway, there are units with wheels, wall mounted display units. Okay, so this is one of my favorite things. I have this framed on my desk. This is a picture of a fellow on his hands and knees on a lawn cutting the grass with scissors. And it says making slow progress, because thinking about all these things can really be overwhelming, and you can say, I can't do it. But I want you to think about small incremental change, because small changes, one after the other, really add up to transformation. I want to make sure, I'm sure Caroline has told you about this, but I want to emphasize that the ALA has a new round of small and rural libraries accessibility grants that is open now until December 11. I am one of the national advisors for this program, and I encourage you to apply if you are small and rural. And the definition is in the materials if you go to that URL on the slide. Anything that I have talked about can be framed as improving services to a group with a disability. So you just have to word it right. And if you want to ask me, do you think this could qualify for a grant, or how could I spin this to qualify for a grant? Just get in touch and I'm happy to talk to you about it. So questions. I do want to say that this last slide, and I gave Caroline a PDF of the slides, and it has this page, and all of these links are live on the PDF. So I just want to mention, here is my email address, here is my LinkedIn, and here is my Pinterest account, which has thousands of photographs of different library spaces. Then underneath that, there is a LibGuide that I created when I was with the Mass Board of Library Commissioners, and it follows up. It has most of the information from this presentation that I did, and it follows up with more resources. And then there's also a session that I did a few years ago with a colleague called the Accidental Facilities Manager. And that is, most librarians, especially library directors, I don't know how to take care of a building. And this talks about that in some detail, and it's free from WebJunction. So, Caroline, do we have any questions in the chat?
I don't see any in the chat yet. Feel free to unmute or start
Yeah.
typing your questions now if you've thought of anything.
Oh.
Question from Lee in the chat. What trends are you seeing now?
The trends that I'm seeing now, beyond all of the fallout from COVID, is leading to things like planning outdoor spaces for services so that you can pivot quicker. Mobile shelving and furniture makes it easier to reconfigure your interior space to corral people away from the main library if you need to limit access. I'm also seeing a resurgence in drive up or walk up windows for services, contactless services. The other trends, the less pandemic related trends are things like study rooms. When I was in Massachusetts, I helped with over 75 renovation and new building projects. And I always went back afterwards and talked to the librarians and said, what would you do differently if you were starting over? And it was always more study rooms because the demand is so great. It's not only are they popular, but with the work from home trend that COVID didn't start, but it certainly exploded because of COVID. People like to have a place they can go outside of their house to have a change of scenery. I like to go to the library and do work in a small study room. The other things that I'm seeing are programming for food literacy and nutrition education. So there's a thing called the Charlie Cart. If you're not familiar with it, I believe it's charliecart.org. It's a self-contained unit. It's about 8 feet by about 3 feet. And it is a self-contained food literacy programming thing. It has everything from a stove to a sink to programs to everything. And it's really fun. What else am I thinking? Libraries of things, that's exploding, and carving out space to store that stuff is a real challenge. Some libraries put it out in the public space, all the objects themselves. Others store the objects in another area and just have a binder or something with photographs of what you can borrow. That's what I can think of off the top of my head. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you. Anybody else? If not, I will just reiterate that if you, excellent. Excellent. Who is that from? I can't see.
And that's from Jean at Berkeley County Library.
Jean, excellent, Jean.
And I have a quick question on
Yep.
the slide with acoustics. Did you
Mm-hmm.
have white noise machines shown there?
I did, and I skipped over that because I wanted to, I was worried that I wouldn't have time for questions, but I will talk about that. The photograph on the top is of sound masking emitters. And sound masking is a very interesting technology that it doesn't reduce noise, but it makes speech unintelligible. So these are little, they look like little speakers, and you install them in the spaces where people are going to be, where they want to be able to concentrate or focus. And it emits something akin to white noise. When you talk to the manufacturers of these, they will say it's not white noise, it's way more scientific than that, but that's a term that people tend to understand. It's a background noise that renders speech unintelligible. And research shows that if you're sitting next to someone having a conversation, if you can understand what they're saying, it's far more distracting than if it's not understandable. So that's what sound masking does. And I know of several libraries that have employed this, and to great effect.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Anything else?
I don't see any other questions in the chat, so we really appreciate you being here and sharing these tips with us.
Of course. And again, I want to encourage anyone who wants to get in touch with me directly. And I will give you 5 minutes of your workday back.
Okay, thank you all for being here, and please be on the lookout for an email from me. We'll have our required survey for our LSTA funding, and we'll also give you a link to the recording and slides. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.